She had nothing left. No money, no home, no future. Just cold hands wrapped around a coffee pot and a smile she'd been faking for 8 months straight. Then the door opened, and the most dangerous man in Chicago sat down at her table and said 4 words that changed everything. I know where he is. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with your whole life, this story is for you. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The coffee was burning her palm through the ceramic, but Sabrina Vale didn't put it down. She'd learned a long time ago that if she stopped moving, the exhaustion would catch her. It would sit on her chest like something with weight and claws, and she'd spend the next 3 minutes in the walk-in cooler trying to breathe without making noise, and Tommy would knock on the door and ask if she was okay, and she would have to lie to his face again, and she was so goddamn tired of lying, so she kept moving. It was 11:47 on a Tuesday night in November, and the Lakeview Diner smelled like burned grease and sweet pie glaze, and the particular kind of loneliness that only accumulates inside places that never close. The fluorescent light above the counter had been flickering since September. The vinyl booth near the window had a crack running through the middle of the seat that management had covered with electrical tape, then ignored. Outside, rain came down in sheets so heavy the neon sign above the door, open 24 hours, bled pink light into puddles on the sidewalk like something bleeding out. Sabrina poured a refill for the man in booth 4 without being asked. He was a regular. Mid-50s, salt and pepper stubble, always ordered the same thing: black coffee, wheat toast, 2 eggs scrambled. He tipped exactly 11% every single time, which told her everything she needed to know about the kind of man he was. But she smiled at him anyway, because that was the job. "Cold night," he said. "Getting colder," she said, and she moved on. This was her life now. This was the reduced version of it, the draft stripped of color, ambition, and warmth. Sabrina Vale, 26 years old, former photography student at the Illinois Institute of Art, former holder of a full creative scholarship, former owner of a Nikon D85. She'd saved for 3 years to buy. Former fiancé of a man she had loved with a completeness that had actually frightened her at the time. She had given Evan Mercer everything, her savings, her plans. 2 years of her life. The specific brand of vulnerability that only shows up when someone convinces you that you are safe. He had taken all of it and disappeared on a Thursday morning in March while she was in class, leaving behind a 3-word note on the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry. Bye." And an overdraft notice from a bank account she hadn't even known they'd opened in her name. $47,000. Gone. Her emergency fund. The remainder of her scholarship payment. The money she'd been saving for a summer trip to shoot film in Lisbon. The deposit she'd already paid on the apartment they were supposed to move into together in April. Gone. All of it. She'd filed a police report. A detective had nodded sympathetically, typed some things, and told her these cases were difficult to pursue. She had called Evan's mother, who cried and said she hadn't heard from him in months. She had called his friends, each of whom went suddenly, suspiciously vague. She had sat on the floor of the apartment she could no longer afford for approximately 4 hours, then gotten up, packed 2 bags, and moved into a studio above a laundromat in Uptown that cost $620 a month, including utilities. She had dropped out of school 3 weeks later. The scholarship required full-time enrollment and a GPA she could no longer maintain while working double shifts. Her academic advisor had been kind about it. That had almost been worse. 8 months had passed. She hadn't bought a single roll of film since. The diner door opened at 11:53, and the rain blew in sideways for half a second before the hinges caught it. Sabrina was behind the counter, refilling the sugar dispensers, and she didn't look up immediately because people came in this late all the time. Cab drivers on break, insomniacs, people who'd just gotten off second shift at the hospital down the block. Chicago didn't sleep. It just changed its face after midnight. But then Tommy went quiet. Tommy was 61 years old and had been working the overnight grill at the Lakeview for 19 years. He had opinions about everything: the Cubs, the price of brisket, the correct way to fold a napkin, the general decline of American attention spans. He talked constantly. It was, in fact, the primary defining characteristic of sharing a shift with Tommy. He went completely silent. Sabrina looked up. There were 4 of them. The 2 who came in first were large in the particular way that announces itself before the body fully registers the threat, broad through the shoulders, moving with a deliberateness that wasn't aggression exactly, but was adjacent to it. They wore dark clothing, nothing flashy, just dark wool coats and expressions that communicated a single message. We are not here for the pie. They scanned the diner in under 3 seconds, the way people do when they've been trained to account for every exit, and then they stepped aside and held the door. The man who walked in behind them wore a cashmere overcoat the color of charcoal, open over a dark suit. No tie. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, dark-haired, clean-shaven, and possessed of the kind of face that would have been beautiful if it hadn't been carrying so much cold. Not the cold of someone unfriendly. The cold of someone who had made a permanent decision about the world a long time ago and had stopped revisiting it. He was tall, not in an obvious performative way, just present in a way that reorganized the room around him. He stood just inside the door and looked around the diner with the unhurried attention of a man who had never once in his life been told to wait. His eyes found Sabrina. They stopped. She felt it before she processed it. Some animal thing low in her chest, an alarm that didn't have a name but was older than language. She had the distinct irrational sensation that she had been found. Not spotted, not noticed. Found. Like something that had been lost and was now being collected. She set down the sugar dispenser. He walked to the counter and sat down on the stool directly in front of her, unhurried, and the 2 men with him settled into a booth near the door without being told to. The 3rd man, who Sabrina hadn't noticed come in, was simply standing near the back hallway. She didn't know when he'd gotten there. "Miss Vale," the man at the counter said, her full name, from a stranger's mouth, at midnight, in a diner she'd been working at for 6 months. "I'm sorry," she said, keeping her voice flat, because panic was a luxury she couldn't afford, and she'd learned that much. "Do I know you?" "No," he said. "But I know you." His voice was low, unhurried, a specific kind of accent, Chicago native, but with something underneath it that suggested more than one language lived in his mouth. He folded his hands on the counter. His hands were clean, manicured, and there was a scar along the inside of his left wrist that disappeared under his sleeve. "My name is Lucien Moretti." The name landed in the room like something dropped. She knew the name. She knew it the way everyone who'd lived in Chicago for more than 2 years knew it. Not from newspapers, not from anything as concrete as an article or a fact, but from the particular texture of whispered conversations, from the way people's voices changed when they said it, from the lowered eyes and the careful silences that followed. Lucien Moretti. Hotels, real estate, construction. The clean front of an empire that everyone in the city understood to be something else entirely. "Okay," she said. She almost smiled. Almost. "You're not afraid? You sat down at my counter at midnight. I'm going to need you to tell me what you want before I decide how to feel about it." That time, something moved in his eyes. Not quite amusement. Recognition, maybe. He studied her the way she'd once studied light sources before a shot, with practical attention. "Coffee," he said, "and a conversation." She poured the coffee. Her hand was completely steady. She was proud of that later. "I know what happened to you in March," he said, when she set the cup in front of him. "Evan Mercer. The money. The apartment. The police report that went exactly nowhere." The name hit her like cold water. She kept her face still. "Why do you know that?" "Because Evan Mercer stole from me too." The fluorescent light flickered twice above them. Somewhere behind her the grill hissed. "How much?" she asked. "More than you," he said, "in a different currency." She looked at him for a long moment. "What does that mean?" Lucien Moretti wrapped both hands around the coffee cup she'd given him. Black, no sugar, she'd noticed. And for just a second, something shifted in his face. Not vulnerability, exactly. Something closer to controlled fury being held at a very specific distance. "It means he also spent 8 months close to my family," he said. "And when he left, he didn't leave empty-handed." Sabrina's mind ran the calculation quickly. 8 months. March. That meant Evan had already been gone by the time March came, or he'd been running more than one con at once, which, she now understood with the specific clarity that only hindsight provides, was precisely the kind of person Evan Mercer had always been. "He was seeing someone in your family," she said. "My half-sister, Isabella." His jaw tightened. 1 degree, barely visible. "She's 22. She believed everything he told her." "So did I." "Yes," he said. "I know." The rain hammered the windows. The man in booth 4 was paying his check. Tommy was still and silent at the grill, which was the most alarming thing happening in the room as far as Sabrina was concerned. "He's in Florida," Lucian said. "Clearwater Beach. He's been there since April. Different name. Mark Ellison. He has a girlfriend, a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment, and a waitressing job he set up using documents that cost him about $3,000 to forge." Her hands pressed flat against the counter. "How long have you known that?" she said, and her voice came out quieter than she intended. "Since June." "And you waited until now?" "I wanted to understand everything first." He met her eyes. "Including you." "Why me?" She heard the anger in her own voice and didn't apologize for it. "What do I have that's worth your time? I'm a waitress with $47,000 in debt and a camera I can't afford the film for. You could destroy him yourself. Tonight. You don't need me." "No," he agreed easily. "I don't need you." He picked up the coffee cup, took one careful sip, and set it back down. "But I want him to suffer," he said. "Not just legally, not just financially. I want him to look up from his small, stolen life and see everything he could have had, and know it belongs to someone else. I want him to spiral. I want him to make mistakes. I want him to come crawling back here on his own, so that when the FBI takes him, he'll have done half the work himself." He looked at her steadily. "For that, I need a woman he already loves." The silence stretched between them. "That's insane," she said. "Probably. You want me to pretend to be your, what, your girlfriend, your fiancée?" "My fiancée," he said. "We'll make it public, extensively. Every event, every appearance, every photograph. His face will be on gossip sites within 2 weeks. He watches Chicago like a hawk. Men like him always go back to watching the life they fled. When he sees you on my arm, it will break something in him, and broken men make mistakes." Sabrina stared at him. She was aware of her heartbeat, which had settled into something loud and purposeful, which was its own kind of answer. "What do I get?" she asked. "Your $47,000, plus interest." He said it without ceremony. "A place to live that doesn't smell like fabric softener. 6 months of stability while we dismantle him. And when it's over, when he's in federal custody and you're free, you walk away clean. No strings, no obligations, no debt to me." She laughed, short and humorless. "No debt to a mafia boss." "Right, because that always ends cleanly." "I don't lie about my contracts," he said. "It's the one professional courtesy I maintain." "That's a very convenient thing for you to say." "Yes," he said, "and it's also true." She looked at him for a long time. She looked at the scar on his wrist. She looked at his hands and the cold, contained purpose behind his eyes, and the way he had walked into this diner like it was already his. Like every room he entered became his just by virtue of him standing in it. She thought about the apartment above the laundromat. She thought about the $47,000. She thought about standing in the kitchen on a Thursday morning in March, reading 3 words on a slip of paper while the life she'd built quietly emptied out beneath her feet. She thought about Lisbon, about the camera she hadn't touched in 8 months, about the specific shade of late afternoon light through dirty glass that she'd been photographing the morning everything ended, and how she'd never actually finished developing that roll of film. "I want it in writing," she said. "Every dollar, every term." "Tomorrow morning," he said. "My lawyer will deliver the documents to you before 9. "I need until 6 tonight to decide." He nodded once. He left $40 on the counter for a $2 cup of coffee, and stood, buttoning his coat with unhurried precision. "Miss Vale," he said at the door. She looked up. "He left you behind," Lucian said. "It's time to be the reason he regrets it." The door closed. The rain swallowed him. Tommy let out a breath that sounded like it had been building for 6 minutes. "Sabrina," he said. "That was Lucian Moretti." "I know," she said. "You know what he—" I know, Tommy. She picked up the $40, set it in the tip jar, picked up the coffee cup he'd used and stood there for a moment with it in her hand, looking at nothing in particular. Then she went back to refilling the sugar dispensers. But her mind was already somewhere else entirely. She didn't sleep. The studio above the laundromat was approximately 400 square feet, which was generous only if you had very specific opinions about what constituted square footage. The bed folded out of the wall. The kitchenette was a single hot plate, a mini fridge, and a piece of counter space barely wide enough for a cutting board. The window looked out onto an alley where someone's generator hummed all night. She sat on the edge of the fold-out with the lawyer's documents in her lap. They had, in fact, been slid under her door by 7:45 in the morning before she'd even come off her overnight shift, which told her something about the kind of machine she was considering walking into. And she read every line 3 times. It was exactly what he'd said, $47,215. The specific amount, down to the exact dollar, which meant he'd had her bank records, which meant he'd had access to information that should have been private, protected, sealed inside financial institutions, which meant that the machine she was looking at had arms that reached into places she hadn't even considered. That should have terrified her. It did, a little. But underneath the fear was something harder and more practical, which was the understanding that the world she'd been operating in, the world of police reports and academic advisors and overdrawn accounts and electrical tape repairs on broken diner booths, had not protected her either. That world had nodded sympathetically and typed some things and told her these cases were difficult to pursue. Lucien Moretti had found Evan Mercer in 2 months. She read the contract again. The terms were precise and contained no ambiguities she could identify, which either meant it was legitimate or meant the people who drafted it were skilled enough to hide the ambiguities she couldn't see. She had no way of knowing which. She thought about that for a while. Then she called the one person she trusted. Daria Kovac had been her roommate for 2 years at the Institute before Sabrina moved in with Evan, which Daria had expressed reservations about at the time in the specific, careful way of a friend who knows their opinion won't be well received. Daria was now a paralegal at a firm in River North and had the particular worldview of someone who spends all day watching other people's bad decisions produce paperwork. "Read me the contract," Daria said. Sabrina read it. There was a long pause. "It's clean," Daria said. "I mean, for what it is. The indemnification clause on page 4 is standard. The confidentiality provision is weighted in his favor, but that's not unusual. The payment structure is real. That's an escrow account, not a personal promise." She paused. "Sabrina, this is Lucien Moretti." "I know." "Do you know what that means?" "I know what people say it means." "People say it means a lot of things that are true," Daria said. "This isn't some shady real estate developer. This is the Moretti family. They've been—" "Sabrina, people who work for him don't just leave." "He says I can walk away clean." "He says that in a contract he drafted." "You just said it was clean." "Legally clean and morally clean are 2 different zip codes," Daria said. Sabrina looked out the window at the alley. The generator was still humming. "He knows where Evan is," she said. A long silence. "Clearwater," she said. "He's been there since April. Living under a different name, he has a girlfriend." She heard Daria absorb that. "Of course he does," Daria said, very quietly. "He took $47,000 from me, Dare. He took 2 years of my life, and he left me a 3-word note and moved to Florida and started over. He is living the life he was supposed to build with me, with someone else, under a different name." She heard the flatness in her own voice and recognized it as the thing that came after rage had burned through and left the ash behind. "The police told me these cases are difficult to pursue." "I know," Daria said. "Lucien Moretti found him in 2 months." Another long silence. "Sign it," Daria said finally. "But keep a copy. Keep it somewhere he can't access." "I know." "And Sabrina?" A beat. "Be careful with how you feel. Men like that. It doesn't matter how dangerous they are on paper. It's the up-close version that's the problem." Sabrina didn't respond to that. She folded the contract neatly, put it in the inner pocket of her jacket, and lay down on the fold-out bed for exactly 2 hours. At 5:45 in the evening, she packed a bag. At 6 o'clock, a black SUV appeared at the end of her block. She picked up her bag, took one look at the apartment, at the hot plate, the fold-out bed, the window above the alley, the life that had been reduced to 400 square feet of not quite surviving, and she walked out without looking back. The penthouse was on the 43rd floor of a building in the Gold Coast that she'd walked past 100 times without ever looking up. She looked up now. The elevator required a key card. The hallway on 43 was quiet in the expensive engineered way, the kind of silence that costs money, that is built into the walls at the design stage. Lucian Moretti walked 3 steps ahead of her from the elevator and opened the door without ceremony, and Sabrina walked into the kind of space she had seen in design magazines when she was a student and cataloged in the back of her mind under "Not for You." Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides. Chicago below them, lit up and rainy. The lake a black absence to the east. Furniture that was neither cold nor showy. Dark leather, clean lines, a built-in bookcase along the interior wall that was dense with actual books, not decorative arrangements. A kitchen with a counter long enough to work at, and a professional range she probably could have lived in. It smelled like cedar and something she couldn't identify. Not a candle, something structural almost. "Your room is the second door on the left," Lucian said, dropping his keys on the counter. "There's a private bathroom. The closet has been stocked. Sizes should be accurate. If anything needs replacing, tell Elena. She'll handle it." "Who's Elena?" "My household manager." He poured 2 inches of something amber into a glass. Did not offer her one. "There are 3 members of personal security in the building at all times. Marcus runs point. If anything concerns you, anyone you don't recognize, any contact from Evan or people associated with him, you go to Marcus directly. Before or after I come to you." He looked at her over the rim of the glass. "Marcus is faster." Noted. She set her bag down. She looked around the space, really looked, the way she used to look before her brain stopped caring about the geometry of light and composition and texture. The rain against the glass at this height had a different quality than rain at street level. Up here, it was softer, somehow, less aggressive. "The first public event is Friday night," he said, "a charity gala at the 4 Seasons. We'll have photographs taken entering. Elena has arranged styling." He paused. "You'll need to be comfortable standing close to me. It needs to look real." "How close?" "Close enough that no one who sees us wonders." She nodded. "Okay." "You're very calm," he said, "for someone who packed a single bag and walked into a stranger's penthouse." "I'm not calm," she said. "I'm exhausted. There's a difference. Calm people have bandwidth for fear. I'm running on empty, which means I don't have the energy for it." Something moved through his expression, not quite sympathy, but an adjacent attention. He looked at her the way she'd looked at him in the diner, with the practical focus of someone taking inventory. "There's food in the kitchen," he said. "Real food, not diner food. Elena stocked it this afternoon." She was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" He waited. "Isabella?" she said. "Your sister. How is she?" The question landed differently than she'd intended. She watched it go through him, watched the careful, layered composure shift fractionally. "She's safe," he said. "She's home. She's—" A pause, controlled and brief. "She's 7 months along." 7 months. March was 8 months ago. The calculation wasn't difficult. "Does she know about any of this?" Sabrina asked. "She knows he's being handled," he said. "She doesn't need the details. She's going to have his child." "She's going to have a baby," he said. "The child belongs to this family. Evan Mercer has no place in it." She studied him for a moment. The absolute certainty in that sentence, the complete lack of ambiguity. It wasn't cruelty. It was something older and more structural, a loyalty built on a foundation that didn't ask permission. She found to her own mild surprise that she understood it. She picked up her bag and went to find the second door on the left. The room was not what she expected, though she couldn't have said precisely what she'd expected. Not this. A bed wide enough to lose herself in, linen that was the right weight for November, a window facing north toward the lake, and on the desk in the corner, a camera. Not her camera. A Nikon Z8, which was better than her camera by a generation. Still in the box. Beside it, a note in handwriting that was angular and exact. "The building has interesting light in the early morning. L." She stood there for a long time. She didn't cry. She wasn't sure she had it in her anymore. But something moved in her chest, something she'd thought had calcified and gone quiet in the months since March. And she sat down on the edge of the bed and put both hands over her face and breathed. Then she got up, washed her face, changed her clothes, went to the kitchen and found food. Real food, like he said, vegetables and actual protein, and a bottle of wine she considered, and then put back. And she made herself a meal for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember. She sat at the long counter and ate in silence while the rain came down against 43 floors of glass. Chicago hummed below her like something alive. Somewhere in Florida, in a 2-bedroom apartment under a fake name, Evan Mercer was sleeping easy. Not for much longer. Mute. By Friday evening, Sabrina Vale no longer looked like herself. That was not an observation of loss. It was a factual assessment of transformation, and she stood in front of the full-length mirror in the penthouse's dressing room and made herself examine it without flinching. The gown was black silk, structured at the shoulders, open at the back to the waist. The jewelry was simple: 1 diamond pendant, earrings that caught light without demanding attention. Her hair was up. The makeup was precise, understated, and had been applied by a woman named Cora, who worked with the focused silence of a surgeon. She looked, in the parlance of a world she had never actually inhabited, like she belonged. It was a costume. She knew that. But it fit. Lucien appeared in the doorway of the dressing room at 7:45. He wore a dark suit with a white shirt, no tie, which she was beginning to understand was his signature refusal of formality, the gesture of a man who attended formal events on his own terms. He looked at her with the assessing attention she was getting used to. "Good," he said. "High praise," she said. "It is," he said, without irony. In the elevator down, he gave her the framework in the same precise, unhurried voice he used for everything. They had been together since the summer. They'd kept it private initially. He valued privacy. Her background was being managed. A story had been developed, attributing her scholarship, her photography work, a vague portfolio of creative projects. Nothing provable, nothing that required maintenance. His circle would ask few questions. They all knew better. "What do I call you?" she asked. "Lucien." "Not Luke?" "No one calls me Luke." "What about in private?" He looked at her sideways. "We're never really in private," he said. "Not in the way you mean. There are always people in this building." "That's not what I asked." A pause. The elevator opened onto the lobby. "Lucien," he said. "That's all?" The SUV was waiting. Marcus held the door. Outside the Four Seasons, photographers were arranged with the particular organized hunger of people who have been tipped off. And when Lucien stepped out first and turned to give Sabrina his hand, she took it. She was aware of the warmth of his palm, the steadiness of it, the way he didn't grip her hand. He simply held it, with a certainty that felt, despite everything, like the most solid thing she'd touched in 8 months. The cameras went off like small lightning. She turned her face toward him just slightly, the way she'd been told, and in the burst and flash she felt something she hadn't expected. Not performance, not pretending, but the strange, quiet clarity of a woman who had spent 8 months being invisible, being seen. She kept her face composed. But something had begun. On Saturday morning, Sabrina was up before 7, barefoot on the cold kitchen tile, making coffee and not entirely sure why she felt more rested than she had since March, when she heard Lucien's voice from the living room. He was on the phone. She wasn't trying to listen, but the penthouse was open plan and his voice carried. "I don't care what Marcus says. No one touches him until I say so. Not yet." A pause. "Because I want him watching. I want him watching her." She stared at the coffee maker. "Tell Reyes to sit on the accounts. If anything moves out of Florida, I want to know in 10 minutes. Another pause, longer. "Isabella's fine. She's resting. Stop asking me and start working." The call ended. She heard him come into the kitchen. She poured 2 cups without turning around. "You heard that," he said. "Some of it." She turned and handed him one of the cups. He took it. He looked at her with the kind of expression that was not apology. It didn't ask for anything, but was honest about itself. "The plan requires patience," he said. "I figured. You're not bothered by it?" She considered the question. Outside, Chicago was gray and damp, and the lake was a flat pewter line below the clouds. The photographs from last night had already appeared on 2 gossip sites. She'd looked first thing, and the comments were doing exactly what Lucian had predicted. Who is she? And Lucian Moretti. And already, one person tagging a Florida area account with the message, "Bet a certain someone is going to hate this." She looked at Lucian across the counter. "I'm bothered by a lot of things," she said. "I'm choosing which ones to act on." He studied her. "And this?" "This is the one I'm not acting on," she said. He nodded once, drank his coffee, and the morning moved forward, gray and purposeful and full of something that had not yet been named. She didn't know it yet, but 3 days later, Evan Mercer would see the photographs, and everything would begin to crack. The photographs were everywhere by Monday. Sabrina knew it before she checked her phone, because Marcus knocked on her door at 6:48 in the morning, early even by the penthouse's standard operating rhythm. And when she opened it, he handed her a tablet with the screen already lit. 12 separate outlets, 4 gossip sites, 2 legitimate entertainment columns that had apparently decided Lucian Moretti's romantic life qualified as culture. The clearest photograph was from the Four Seasons entrance, her hand in his, her face turned slightly toward him, the diamonds catching the flash. The headline on the largest site read, "Moretti's Mystery Woman. Who is she?" 3 other headlines were less restrained. "He's seen it," Marcus said. She looked up from the tablet. Marcus was built like a man who had spent decades making himself useful in situations that required something more than conversation. Late 40s, close-cropped gray at his temples, a face that had learned a long time ago to give nothing away without permission. He had worked for the Moretti family for 11 years, which Sabrina had learned not by being told but by the way Lucian spoke to him, not like an employee, like a fact of the landscape. "Evan," she said. Someone in his network flagged it to him at 4 this morning, Florida time. Marcus's expression didn't change. His phone activity spiked. He made 7 calls in 40 minutes. 7 calls at 4 in the morning. She could picture it. Could picture him sitting up in whatever stolen bed he was sleeping in the life he'd built from her money and his lies, and staring at a photograph of the woman he'd left behind standing in diamonds next to the most feared man in Chicago. Good, she thought, and the thought had no warmth in it. It was flat and hard and precise, like a surgical instrument. "Where's Lucien?" she asked. "His office. He's been up since 3. She handed back the tablet, went to get dressed. His office was the room she'd been told was private, which she'd respected for 4 days without being asked to. Today she knocked once and went in before he answered, because something about Marcus's expression at 6:48 had communicated that waiting for an invitation was not the right instinct this morning. Lucian was standing at the window. Jacket off, sleeves rolled to the forearm, a phone in one hand and a posture that told her the call had just ended and hadn't gone the way he wanted. The desk behind him was scattered. Actually scattered, papers and open folders and 2 empty coffee cups, which was the first visible evidence she'd seen that disorder was something he could produce. He turned when she came in, looked at her. "He's moving money," Lucian said without preamble. "Already?" "Small transfers, 800 here, 1,200 there, pulling from 3 different accounts." He set the phone on the desk. He's scared. Scared men liquidate. Or they run. He's not running. He said it with a certainty that wasn't arrogance. It was something more specific, a knowledge of how a particular kind of person behaves when they feel cornered. Men like Evan don't run when they're scared. They come toward the thing that frightened them. They need to understand it, control it. He looked at her. "He'll make contact within the week." "With me?" "With someone who can reach you. He'll find a way." She stood in the middle of the office and thought about that. The idea of Evan Mercer trying to reach her didn't produce the response she might have predicted 6 months ago. Not the chest tightening, not the specific nausea of someone who had been hurt by a person they trusted. What it produced instead was a cold, focused attention, like a camera finding its subject. "What do you need from me?" she said. Lucian looked at her for a moment with the particular quality of attention she was beginning to recognize as his version of surprise. Not the wide-eyed kind, but a slight recalibration, a fractional shift in how he was holding himself. "Today?" he said. "Breakfast. We eat here, in view of the building's cameras. And we look like two people who slept in the same penthouse because that's what they do. He paused. Tomorrow evening, there's a dinner. Private, about 14 people. My inner circle. You'll be introduced properly. The inner circle, she said. That sounds like an audition. It is, he said. There was no apology in it. What happens if I fail it? You won't, he said. You handled the gala without coaching. You read a room the way someone does when they've been trained to observe, not perform. Your photography background, the way you look at a space before you settle into it. He picked up one of the coffee cups, found it empty, set it back down. These people will see what they expect to see because we'll be giving them something coherent to look at. Just stay close and let them talk. And don't volunteer information. Don't volunteer anything, he confirmed. She nodded. She turned to go. Sabrina. She stopped. He made 9 calls, Lucienne said. Not 7. Marcus told you 7 because he thought the number might alarm you. He held her gaze. I don't manage information I share with you. If something happens involving Evan, you hear the real number. She felt something shift in her chest. Not gratitude exactly, but something that occupied similar space. 9 calls, she said. 9 calls in 38 minutes. A beat. He's unraveling. Good, she said. And this time, she let him hear the flatness in it. He did. She watched him process it, and what she saw in his face wasn't discomfort with her anger. It was something that looked almost like respect. She went to make breakfast. The dinner on Tuesday was held in a private room at a restaurant in the West Loop that had no sign on the door and no reservation system accessible to the general public. 14 people around a long table with the kind of easy authority that comes from spending decades in a world where the rules are yours. Sabrina wore deep burgundy. She sat to Lucien's right and spent the first 40 minutes doing exactly what he'd said, staying close, letting people talk, watching. They were interesting, these people. Not what she'd expected, or rather, not entirely what she'd expected. There was a woman named Vera who ran 3 luxury hotels and had the eyes of someone who had outlasted at least 2 serious attempts to remove her from power. There was a man called Donati who said almost nothing all evening and whose silence carried more weight than most people's sentences. There were younger ones who deferred to Lucien with a care that was not sycophancy, but something more functional, like gravitational awareness. They were all watching her. She knew it. She let them. What she hadn't anticipated was the couple across the table, Marco Ferretti, who was Lucien's cousin, and his wife, Claire. Marco was loud in a way that was probably charming in smaller doses, well-dressed and physically expressive, and possessed of the specific social ease of someone who had grown up comfortable. Claire was quiet and watchful, and had been studying Sabrina since the first course with an attention that was neither hostile nor warm. During the third course, Marco leaned across the table. So, he said, in the register of a man who thinks he's being casual when he is in fact conducting an interview. Photography. Lucien says you're serious about it. I am, Sabrina said. What kind? Documentary mostly, candid work. She held his gaze easily. I like catching people when they don't know they're being watched. A beat of silence. Marco laughed. Oh, I like her, he said to Lucien. Lucien did not look up from his plate. I know, he said. Claire across the table met Sabrina's eyes, and something passed between them. Not quite a smile, but the specific acknowledgement of 2 women in a room full of loud men who both know exactly how much is not being said. After dinner, in the car going home, Lucien sat beside her in the back of the SUV and said nothing for 4 blocks. Then, Marco will tell everyone you're real within 48 hours. Because of the photography comment? Because you didn't try, he said. The ones I've brought before, they tried. They performed. Marco smells performance. He looked at the city passing outside the window. You just talked. I was just talking, she said. I know, he said. That's why it worked. She turned to look at him in the dark of the car. He was in profile, looking out the window, the city light strobing across his face in intervals, and she became aware in that moment of something she hadn't fully registered until now, the particular loneliness that lived inside his composure. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't self-pitying. It was structural, built into the way he existed, the way he moved through rooms, the way he gave orders and received information and made decisions, all of it wrapped in a self-sufficiency so complete it looked like strength, and was, she suspected, also its own kind of cage. She looked away before he turned. The contact from Evan came on Thursday. It didn't come from Evan directly, which she should have predicted. It came from a woman named Kayla, who had been Evan's college girlfriend before Sabrina, and whom Sabrina had met exactly twice, and both times she had felt the low-grade unease of someone in the presence of unfinished business. Kayla texted from a number Sabrina didn't have saved. The message was brief and artless. "Hey, weird question, but have you talked to Evan? He keeps calling me, and he sounds really off. Said something about Chicago, about some guy. Are you okay?" Sabrina read it twice. Then she walked into the living room where Lucien was reading and held her phone out to him without comment. He read it. His jaw tightened slightly. He handed the phone back. "Don't respond yet," he said. "I know. Let him wait 3 hours. Then reply. Something neutral. You haven't talked to Evan in months. You've moved on. You're fine." He paused. "Don't mention me. He already knows about you. He knows about us. But you mentioning me confirms you're thinking about him thinking about us." He looked at her steadily. "Don't give him that." She nodded, sat down, turned the phone face down on the cushion beside her. They were quiet for a moment in the same room, which was something she was becoming accustomed to. The particular quality of shared silence in the penthouse, which was different from the silence of the studio apartment. That silence had been empty. This one was occupied, dense with things neither of them was saying. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He closed his book without marking the page. "Isabella's father," she said. "Your father. He's not dead," Lucien said. 7 years ago. "And her mother?" "Different mother than mine." A pause. No visible discomfort, just the flat delivery of facts that had been processed long ago. "She left when Isabella was 3. I raised her." He said it the same way he said everything, without asking for a response. "How old were you?" 24. She did the math. He was 35 now, which she'd estimated. 24 years old, inheriting a family empire and a 3-year-old child simultaneously. "That's," she started. "It was what it was," he said. Not dismissive, just finished. She looked at him for a moment. "She's lucky to have you. She's also 22 and pregnant, and the man responsible has been tracked to a beach apartment in Florida," he said. "Luck is relative." "You know what I mean." "Yes," he said. "I do." Another silence. He opened the book again. She picked up the phone and turned it over in her hands. 3 hours, she said. 3 hours, he confirmed, and went back to reading. Friday broke with this kind of cold that came off the lake like an intention, and Sabrina was up early with the new camera, the Z8 she had finally, after 5 days, removed from the box. She hadn't told Lucien she'd started using it. She wasn't sure why. It felt private in a way she couldn't explain, like the first breath after a long time underwater, and she wasn't ready to share the sound of it. She stood at the north window in the early gray light and shot the lake. The way the light hit the water from that height had a quality she'd never captured before. The flatness of it, the pewter and silver, the buildings at the edges of the frame like an afterthought. She shot for 40 minutes without stopping. Then she sat on the floor with her back against the glass and reviewed the images. And for the first time since March, the specific quietness that used to live inside her when she was working came back, tentative and uncertain and real. She heard him behind her before he spoke. "You're up early," Lucien said. She didn't startle. She'd heard the bedroom door. "Light's better before 7, she said without turning. He walked into the kitchen. She heard coffee being made. A few minutes later, he appeared in her peripheral vision and sat down on the couch with his cup. Not close, but not distant, and didn't say anything else. She kept reviewing images. After a while, he said, "Are they good?" She turned the camera toward him. He leaned forward to look, and she watched his face. The real version of it, unguarded. The morning version before the armor was fully on, as he scrolled through what she'd shot. He didn't say anything for a long time. "The third one," he said. She looked. The third image was the lake at its most still. the light just barely beginning to shift from gray to something warmer at the horizon, and in the foreground, caught in the reflection on the glass, the faintest ghost of the penthouse interior, her own silhouette barely visible, ghost-like and superimposed over the dark water. "Yeah," she said quietly. "That's the one." He handed the camera back. Their fingers didn't quite touch. "You should be shooting," he said, "not waiting tables." "Well," she said, "life had other plans." "Plans change," he said, and went back to his coffee. She put the camera down and looked at her hands and told herself firmly that the warmth working its way up through her chest was circumstantial. It was proximity. It was gratitude. It was the exhaustion of 8 months without anything resembling safety, creating the illusion of attachment. She had given Daria's warning more credit this morning than she had the week before. She got up and went to make her own coffee. The call came at 2 in the afternoon, not from Kayla, from Evan. Her phone rang with a Florida number she didn't recognize, and she stared at it through 3 full rings while her pulse did something violent in her throat. She answered. "Sabrina." His voice was the same. That was the first thing that hit her. The absolute sameness of it, like 8 months hadn't happened, like he'd just stepped out for coffee and was checking in. "Hey, it's me." She breathed out through her nose, slow and deliberate. "I know who it is," she said. A pause. Is this a bad time?" "What do you want, Evan?" Not a question. Flat. She heard Marcus shift in the other room. She'd told him the number when she answered, 3-second delay, fingers finding him by memory across the counter. I saw something online." His voice had an edge to it now, the practiced casual crumbling into something with more grain. "About you, with some guy. I wanted to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine." "Sabrina, I'm fine," she said again. "I've moved on. I suggest you do the same. That man is dangerous." Low and urgent now, the intimacy of a warning, as if he had standing, as if he'd earned the right to warn her about anything. "I don't know what he told you, but Lucien Moretti is not." "You left me a 3-word note," she said. Silence. "You took $47,000 from me," she said. "You opened accounts in my name, and you emptied them, and you left me a 3-word note on a Thursday morning in March, and moved to Florida under a fake name." Her voice was even, not shaking, not raised. "Don't call me to warn me about dangerous men." Dead silence on the line. "How do you know about—" He stopped. She let him stop. "Sabrina." His voice had changed again. Stripped now, the performance falling away, and underneath it she could hear the thing she had almost forgotten, the specific frequency of Evan Mercer when he was scared. "Sabrina, please. I made mistakes, I know that. But if you're with Moretti because of me, because of what I did, you need to get out. That family is—" "Goodbye, Evan," she said. She ended the call. She set the phone on the counter with both hands braced on either side of it, and she stood there very still and breathed. Behind her, Lucien's voice. "That was faster than I expected," he said quietly. She turned. He was standing in the doorway of the office, jacket in hand, looking at her with an attention that was careful and without pity, which was the version of it she could tolerate. "He's scared," she said. "Yes." "He knows you know where he is." "Not yet," Lucien said, "but he suspects, and he can't stop pulling at the thread." He set the jacket over the back of the chair. "You were perfect." "I wasn't performing," she said. "I meant every word." "I know," he said. "That's what made it perfect." She looked at him across the room. She was still feeling the residue of the call in her chest. Not grief, not anymore. Something cleaner. The sensation of a wound that had been open for 8 months finally beginning to close over something harder than it had been before. "He's going to come here," she said. "To Chicago." You said, "Not yet," Lucien said, "but soon." "When he does—" She stopped. "When he does," Lucien said, "we'll be ready." A pause. "And so will the FBI." She blinked. "You've already—" "I've been building the case for 4 months," he said. "The fraud, the embezzlement, the identity documentation, the accounts in your name." Something moved in his jaw. Isabella's medical bills, paid out of stolen funds. All of it documented, packaged, delivered to the right hands. He looked at her steadily. Revenge isn't enough. I want him in a cell. She stared at him. You've been doing this since before you came to me, she said. Yes. Then why do you need me? He held her gaze. The question had an answer. She'd known the answer from the night in the diner. The psychological pressure, the spiral, the bait she was supposed to be. But something in the way he was looking at her right now suggested the answer had developed additional dimensions he hadn't anticipated. I told you in the diner, he said. You told me the plan, she said. I'm asking why you need me, specifically, not a woman, me. A long pause. Because he knew you, Lucian said finally. He chose you. Whatever he is, whatever he did, he chose you, which means you represent something to him that he can't replace or replicate. His voice was even. When he sees you thriving, when he sees you in photographs on the arm of someone like me, it doesn't just hurt his ego. It destabilizes something foundational in the story he tells himself about why he left. He looked at her carefully. You're not bait, Sabrina. You're the mirror. The word settled in her. The mirror. She thought about that for a long time. Outside, the November lake had gone dark and the city lights were beginning to define themselves against the early evening, and the penthouse was very warm and very quiet. And somewhere across an ordinary room, Lucienne Moretti was watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. I'm going to need more coffee, she said. Marcus has a fresh pot, he said. She almost smiled. Almost. She pushed off the counter and went toward the kitchen, and Lucienne turned back toward his office, and neither of them said what was beginning to occupy the air between them. The thing that didn't have a name yet, and was, for that reason, the most dangerous thing in the room. But that night, at 3 a.m, something happened that changed the shape of everything. Sabrina was asleep when the security alarm tripped. Not a full breach, but a perimeter alert, the kind that brought Marcus out of his room with a firearm in under 10 seconds and sent 2 other members of security to the lobby. She was out of bed and at her door before she'd fully processed the sound, heart in her throat, and she nearly walked into Lucienne in the hallway. He caught her by the shoulders. It's clear, he said immediately. It tripped on the south stairwell. Someone tested the door. Tested it, she said. She could feel her own pulse in her palms. Probing, not entering. His hands were still on her shoulders. He was looking at her face with a focus that was reading something. Her breathing, probably, or the specific quality of her fear. It's not the first time. Building surveillance shows a man, mid-30s, no face visible. Been in the area twice this week. Evan, she said. Or someone Evan hired, Lucian said. He doesn't have the nerve for field work. He subcontracts his problems. He said it with the flat contempt of a man who had nothing but disdain for that particular cowardice. She became aware that his hands were still on her shoulders. She became aware that they were standing close in the dim hallway, her heartbeat still loud from being startled awake, and that the controlled, armored version of him she was used to in daylight was slightly different at 3 a.m, still controlled, but the armor sitting differently, closer to the surface of the skin. He became aware of it at the same moment. She could see it in the fractional adjustment. He dropped his hands. Go back to sleep, he said. Marcus has it. Lucienne, go back to sleep, he said, quieter, and turned and walked back toward his room without looking at her again. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she went back to her room and lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and understood, with the specific clarity of someone who has been trained to see what's actually in front of them, that the line between what this was and what it was becoming had just moved. And she wasn't sure anymore which direction she wanted it to go. Quote, the next morning, everything accelerated. Marcus came to the breakfast table at 7:15 with his expression arranged in its most careful configuration, which Sabrina had already learned meant the news was not minor. He set a printed photograph on the table between her and Lucian. It was a surveillance still, grainy and time-stamped. 2:41 in the morning, south stairwell door of the building. A man in a dark jacket, face angled down but partially visible in the overhead light. Lucienne looked at it. Sabrina looked at it. The build was familiar before the face was, which was the way recognition usually works when you don't want it to. That's not someone he hired, she said. Her voice came out very level. She was proud of that later. Lucien was looking at her, not the photograph. No, he said. Evan Mercer was in Chicago, and he was standing 43 floors below them. Merson. Nobody moved for 3 full seconds. That was what Sabrina noticed afterward. The particular stillness that descended over the breakfast table when Marcus laid that photograph down. The way the room seemed to compress around the grainy image of a man in a dark jacket standing 43 floors below them in the middle of the night. 3 seconds where no one breathed wrong, no one shifted, no one said anything premature. Then Lucien picked up the photograph. He held it at the edges the way you hold something you don't want to contaminate, and he looked at it with an expression she was beginning to understand as his most dangerous one. Not the cold authority he wore in public, not the careful composure of private conversations, but something older and quieter that lived underneath all of it. The expression of a man who has already decided what happens next and is simply watching the evidence confirm it. When did he land? Lucien said. Best estimate, yesterday afternoon, Marcus said. O'Hare has him on facial recognition from Terminal 3 at 4:18. He used the Ellison ID, which means he's still operating under the fake documentation. Lucien set the photograph back on the table. He came commercial. No car rental in that name. He's either using cash or he has a local contact. We're running both. Run them faster. Marcus left. Sabrina looked at the photograph. Evan's face, angled down, partially visible in the harsh white of the stairwell light. She had loved that face once, or she had loved what she'd believed that face contained, which was not the same thing, and the distance between those two statements was the whole geography of the last 8 months. He's trying to see me, she said. He's trying to see you without being seen, Lucien corrected. There's a difference. If he wanted contact, he'd have called again. He pushed back from the table and stood, buttoning the middle button of his jacket with the precise, unhurried motion she'd catalogued by now as something he did when he was organizing his thinking. He came to look, to confirm what the photographs told him. That I'm real, she said. That you're his. He looked at her. In his mind. Still. That's how he's built. Everything he touches belongs to him in some permanent foundational way, regardless of what he did to acquire it or destroy it. His voice had no heat in it, just the diagnostic flatness of a man describing a specimen. He needs to see you in this context with his own eyes before he acts. Photographs can be staged. He knows that. He knows that because he staged them, she said. Yes. She picked up her coffee. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. So what do we do? She said. We give him what he came for, Lucien said. Today. We go out. You and I. In public. In daylight. Let him see you. Let him see us. He paused. And then we let him break. She nodded slowly. There's one more thing, Lucien said. His voice shifted, fractionally, barely perceptible, but she heard it. She looked up. Isabella wants to meet you, he said. Isabella Moretti lived in a townhouse in Lincoln Park that Lucien owned and that felt, from the moment Sabrina walked in, like a deliberate act of shelter. It was warm and slightly overfurnished in the way of someone who had decorated for comfort rather than aesthetics, full of soft textures and indirect light, and the smell of something baking that turned out to be store-bought cookies Isabella had put in the oven because, she explained without embarrassment, she liked the way it made the house smell. She was 7 months pregnant, dark-haired like her brother, and possessed of a face that wore its emotions differently than his. Where Lucien's composure was constructed and maintained, Isabella's was simply her natural state, open and direct and occasionally startling in its lack of filter. She opened the door before Sabrina could knock. You're shorter than the photographs, Isabella said. I'm wearing flats, Sabrina said. Isabella looked at her feet. Huh. Fair. She stepped back. Come in. Lucien texted that you were on your way and then stopped answering, which is how he communicates when he's doing something he doesn't want me asking about. He's handling something, Sabrina said, stepping inside. He's always handling something. Isabella closed the door. Do you want tea? I can't have coffee anymore, and it's making me a genuinely worse person. Tea is fine. They sat at the kitchen table while the kettle heated, and Sabrina looked at Isabella Moretti and tried to figure out what she'd expected and why this was different. What she'd expected, she realized, was fragility, a 22-year-old undone by a man's betrayal, made soft and careful by it. What she found instead was someone who was angry in the specific, load-bearing way of a person who has absorbed something terrible and chosen to be stronger than it, even if that choice was still in progress. "He told you about me," Isabella said. It wasn't a question. "Some," Sabrina said. "Did he tell you I knew at the end?" She met Sabrina's eyes across the table. "That something was wrong before he left. I knew." Her jaw tightened. "I told myself I was paranoid, that it was the pregnancy making me anxious. I made excuses for him." She said it with the particular self-directed anger of someone who had already had this conversation with themselves many times. "He was lying to my face for the last 2 months, and I kept choosing not to see it." "That's not stupidity," Sabrina said. "That's what happens when you trust someone. It's what happens when you trust the wrong someone." "Yes," Sabrina said. "It is." Isabella looked at her for a long moment. The kettle began to make noise. She got up, carefully, with the precise physical awareness of someone in the last trimester, and poured without asking how Sabrina took it, then set both cups on the table and sat back down. "He's here, isn't he?" Isabella said. "Evan, in Chicago." Sabrina was quiet for one beat. "You should ask Lucien." "I'm asking you." Not aggressive, just direct, with the weight of someone who was done being managed. "I'm 7 months pregnant, and this is my life and my child's life, and I'm done having information rationed to me by people who think they're protecting me." Sabrina looked at her. "Yes," she said. "He got into the city yesterday." Isabella absorbed that. She wrapped both hands around her cup, the same gesture, Sabrina realized with a jolt, that Lucien made, and she breathed steadily through her nose and looked at the table. "Okay," she said. Quiet. Controlled. "Okay. Isabella, I'm fine." She looked up. Her eyes were clear. "I'm not going to fall apart. I did my falling apart in April. I'm done with it." She held Sabrina's gaze. "Is Lucien going to keep him away from me?" "Yes," Sabrina said, with a certainty she felt as a fact, not an opinion. "Absolutely yes." Something in Isabella's shoulders released. "Good," she said. Then, after a moment, "Do you love him?" The question arrived without warning and with no apparent sense that it might require preparation. Sabrina felt her hands go still around the cup. "That's," she started. "I know what the arrangement is," Isabella said. "Lucien told me. Fake engagement, psychological pressure campaign, FBI case. I know all of it." She looked at Sabrina with the directness of someone who had nothing left to be tactful about. "I'm asking what's actually happening, because I've known my brother for 22 years and I have never seen him put a camera on someone's desk before." The kitchen was very quiet. "We have a contract," Sabrina said carefully. "That's not an answer." "No," Sabrina said. "It's not." Isabella nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something she'd already suspected, and wrapped her hands tighter around her cup, and didn't push further, which was its own kind of answer. Lucien was waiting outside in the SUV when Sabrina came out an hour later, and he looked at her face when she got in and said nothing for 2 blocks. Then, "How is she?" "Angry," Sabrina said. "Strong." A pause. "She knows he's here." His jaw tightened. "I was going to tell her tonight. She asked me directly. I wasn't going to lie to her." A long beat. She expected pushback, some version of the controlled authority he applied to information management, the careful rationing Isabella had named. Instead, he said, "That's fine," and turned to look out the window. "She asked if I love you," Sabrina said. He went very still. The SUV moved through early afternoon traffic, and Chicago passed outside the windows in its gray November specificity, the brick and the neon and the L tracks and the cold lake light, and neither of them looked at the other. "What did you tell her?" he said. His voice was even, careful. "That we have a contract," she said. A pause. "That's true," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." And they didn't say anything else until they reached the Gold Coast, and she filed the conversation away in the part of herself she wasn't examining too closely yet, and told herself firmly that Isabella was 22 and pregnant and reading things into a situation that she needed to believe was a love story because love stories were safer than what it actually was. She told herself that. She didn't entirely believe it. Gisot. The public appearance was lunch at a restaurant on Michigan Avenue, outdoor seating under heat lamps because Lucien had, without explanation, requested the most visible table available. They sat close and the photographs happened organically, because they always did now. People with phones, someone with a long lens across the street, the perpetual Chicago machinery of watching and being watched. Sabrina kept her posture turned slightly toward him, kept her expression settled and warm, and felt the strange doubling of it, performing closeness that was no longer entirely performance, enacting an intimacy that had, somewhere in the last 2 weeks, stopped being entirely constructed. She was looking at the menu when she felt it, the particular awareness of being watched from the wrong direction. Not the cameras, not the phones, something more specific, a gaze with pressure behind it, with the heat of something personal. She didn't look up immediately. She counted 3 seconds, then let her eyes travel casually to the left. Across the street. A coffee shop with floor-to-ceiling windows. A man at a corner table, face visible for just a second before he looked down. But 1 second was enough. She set the menu down. "He's across the street," she said quietly. "Coffee shop, corner window." Lucien did not look up, did not change his posture. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, a gesture they had used before in public, comfortable and practiced, and his thumb moved once across her knuckles. "I see him," he said. "You can't see that from here." "Marcus texted me 30 seconds ago," he said. "He's been there since before we arrived." He looked at her now, meeting her eyes across the table with an attention so steady it anchored her. "Look at me." Not at him. "Look at me and laugh, like I said something." She looked at him. She laughed. Not a performance laugh, but an actual one, because the absurdity of the instruction was briefly genuine. A man asking her to laugh at nothing in front of the man who had destroyed her life while they dismantled him together. And Lucien, watching her face, produced something she hadn't seen from him before. A real smile. Not the controlled version, not the almost smile she'd cataloged. A real one, small and slightly crooked and lasting approximately 2 seconds before it disappeared back into his composure. She felt it in her chest like a small detonation. She looked back at her menu. "Don't fall apart on me now," he said quietly. "I'm not falling apart," she said. "I'm recalibrating." "Recalibrate faster," he said. "He's still watching." She recalibrated. 1. That evening, the plan came apart. She would reconstruct the sequence afterward, trying to identify the exact moment, the hinge point, the specific error, and she would never be entirely able to locate it, because betrayal of a certain kind doesn't arrive at a single identifiable moment. It accumulates. It has been arriving for longer than you knew. It started with a phone call to Lucien at 6:47 in the evening. She was in the kitchen and he was in the office, and she heard his voice change within the first 10 seconds. Not loud, not raised, but shifted in register, moving from the controlled working tone to something stripped and sharp underneath. She stayed where she was. The call lasted 4 minutes. Then his office door opened and he came into the kitchen with his phone still in his hand and an expression she had not seen on him before. The expression of a man who has been hit by something he didn't see coming and is in the process of deciding how much he will allow that to show. "What happened?" she said. He set the phone on the counter. "Reyes," he said. "One of my men in Florida. He's been feeding information to Evan for 6 weeks." She went cold. "What kind of information?" she said. "Everything." His voice was flat. The controlled fury beneath it was so compressed it had become structural. She could feel it in the room like pressure. "The case? The FBI contacts, the timeline, the documentation." He looked at her. "He sold it to Evan 3 days ago. All of it. For $40,000. The kitchen was absolutely silent. She understood the geometry of it immediately. The whole architecture of 4 months of careful construction, the fraud documentation, the packaged evidence, the FBI handoff that was supposed to happen when Evan came to Chicago and made his mistakes. All of it now in Evan's hands. all of it available to a man with enough money and enough panic to use it as either a weapon or an escape route. "He'll run," she said. "He already has a head start," Lucian said. "If he moves tonight, can the FBI still—" "Without the documentation in our hands, the case is weaker. Not gone. Weaker. Which means lawyers, delays, the possibility of a deal." His jaw tightened. "Which means he walks out of it lighter than he should." She put both hands flat on the counter. "How did this happen?" she said. "Reyes had a gambling debt," Lucian said. "Evan found it. It's the oldest method because it still works." He picked up his phone again, set it back down. "I should have run deeper checks. I ran background, not current financial. I missed it." He said it plainly. Not self-flagellation, not excuse. A man identifying an error with the clarity of someone who would not make it again. "So what do we do?" she said. "I need to make calls," he said. "Accelerate the FBI contact, move what documentation we still control tonight. And I need to know—" He stopped. She looked at him. "I need to know if you're willing to change the timeline, check them," he said. "Tell me what that means." "The original plan had Evan coming to us, making contact, making mistakes, walking into the situation we'd prepared." He looked at her steadily. "That timeline is gone. He has information now that tells him exactly what was being built, which means if he's going to act, he'll act fast. Tonight, tomorrow, at the latest." A beat. "There's a dinner tomorrow evening, a private mafia event, major players, a room full of people Evan knows are connected to me. He knows about it," Reyes told him. "You think he'll come?" she said. "I think he'll come to take something back," he said. "The way he always does. He can't leave without trying to reclaim the narrative." He held her gaze. "Which means tomorrow night, when he shows up, and I believe he will, there will be no preparation, no staged confrontation. Whatever happens will be real." She looked at him for a long time. "Are you asking me if I can handle that?" she said. "I'm asking if you're still in," he said, "because what I'm describing tomorrow is not the plan you signed for." The kitchen hummed around them. The refrigerator, the city outside the glass, the 43 floors of November air between them and the street. She thought about the 3-word note. She thought about $47,000. She thought about the photography scholarship and the roll of film she never developed, and the 400-square-foot apartment above the laundromat that had smelled like other people's clean laundry. She thought about Isabella, wrapping both hands around a cup of tea and saying, "I'm done with my falling apart." She thought about Lucian's real smile, 2 seconds long and slightly crooked, appearing once and disappearing before she could fully process it. "I'm in," she said. He nodded once, picked up his phone, started toward the office. "Lucien." He stopped. "Is the camera, She paused, finding the precise question. "The camera you put in my room. Was that part of the plan? Make me feel... Give me something back so I'd be..." She didn't finish the sentence because she wasn't sure what she was accusing him of. He turned. His face was open in a way it almost never was. The layers stripped by the events of the last hour, the composure running thin. He looked at her with something that was, she thought, the closest thing to unguarded she had seen on him. "No," he said. Simple. No elaboration, no argument. She looked at him. "Okay," she said. He went back to the office. She stayed at the counter. Outside, the city went about its business 43 floors below. And somewhere in it, Evan Mercer was looking at everything Reyes had sold him and making decisions that would define the next 24 hours for all of them. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at the north window with the Z8 in her lap and didn't shoot anything. Just held it, the weight of it familiar now, and watched the city light move on the lake and tried to locate her own center. At 2 in the morning, she heard Lucien's office door, heard him walk to the kitchen, heard the sound of water running, then silence, then his voice, low, "You should sleep." "So should you," she said, without turning. A pause. Then she heard him move, not toward his room, but toward the living room, and the faint sound of him settling onto the couch. And after a moment, the room went quiet again in the specific way that meant someone else was awake in it. They stayed like that until dawn, not talking, not sleeping, just present in the same dark space, while the city turned slowly from night to gray, both of them holding separately the weight of what was coming. Tam. The next day moved with the particular speed of something that has already decided what it's going to do. Lucienne was on the phone from 6 in the morning. She could hear fragments, names she didn't know, numbers that meant nothing to her, the short-clipped language of men building something quickly with imperfect materials. He ate standing up, barely. She made food for both of them, and he looked at the plate she put in front of him with something that crossed his face briefly before he picked up the fork. "Thank you," he said. "Eat it before it's cold," she said. He ate it. She counted that. At noon, a woman arrived at the penthouse that Sabrina hadn't met before. Mid-50s, steel gray hair, the kind of bearing that came from decades of authority. She was introduced as Adriana, and she spent 40 minutes with Lucienne in the office speaking in voices too low to follow. When she left, Lucien came out with his jaw set and his eyes carrying something new. "What is it?" Sabrina said. "Reyes talked to the FBI," he said. "Not our contacts. Different agents. He's trying to flip, trade what he knows about me for immunity on the Evans situation." She stared at him. "He's building a case against you," she said. "Trying to," Lucienne said. "What he has is partial, circumstantial. It won't hold. My lawyers are already—" He stopped himself. "But it changes tonight." "How?" He looked at her with an expression that was, she realized, the last version of the careful management she had been watching him maintain for 2 weeks. The final moment before the controlled exterior became something else. "Tonight isn't just about Evan anymore," he said. "If Reyes's FBI contacts move before my people can contain it, there may be agents at the dinner." She felt the full weight of it land. "Then we walk into a room where your enemies are giving information to federal agents," she said, "while the man who robbed me is somewhere in the building trying to reclaim something." "Yes," he said. "And the plan is—" "There is no plan," he said. "There's a direction. And everyone in that room will be watching you and me, because whatever else happens tonight, we are still the story everyone in that world is watching, which means—" He stopped. She finished it. "Which means we have to be real," she said. "Not performed, real. Because in a room full of people who can smell a lie from across the table, with federal eyes somewhere in the building and Evan Moretti already knowing every piece of the strategy," she heard her own voice, steady and flat and clear. "The only thing that will hold is something true." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. The words sat between them like a door that had just opened. She looked back at him, at the man who had walked into a dine diner at midnight and offered her revenge and a contract, who had put a camera on her desk without explanation, who had stayed awake until dawn on a couch rather than leave her alone with the dark, who had smiled once and only once with something real behind it, and who was standing in front of her now with his careful architecture partially dismantled, looking at her with the expression of a man confronting something he had not planned for. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. And somewhere in the building below, 43 floors down, Evan Mercer was watching the front door. Waiting. Coming. And by the time they walked into that dinner, Sabrina Vale would have to decide whether the woman she had become in the last 2 weeks, not the diner waitress, not the abandoned fiancé, not the fake attachment on the arm of a dangerous man, was real enough to survive. The car arrived at 7:15. Sabrina sat in the back beside Lucienne and did not look at him and did not speak. And the city moved past the windows in its November configuration. The wet streets, the neon bleeding into puddles, the particular darkness of a Chicago night that had decided to mean something. Marcus was in the front. 2 other vehicles flanked them, which was more security than any previous event, which told her everything about how Lucienne assessed the evening ahead. She was wearing black again. Not the gala gown, something different, closer to armor in its structure, fitted through the shoulders and severe at the neckline and chosen by her this time, not Elena, from the wardrobe that had accumulated over 2 weeks in the penthouse closet. She had stood in front of the mirror for approximately 90 seconds before coming out, which was the shortest she'd spent on her appearance since arriving, because tonight was not about the mirror. Tonight was about the room. "The dinner's 40 people," Lucian said without looking at her. He was looking out the window, his profile to her, and his voice had the particular quality it took on when he was running through operational details. Precise, stripped of inflection. "Private function room at the Meridian Club. 3 entrances. Marcus controls the main door. Our people are on the service entrance and the emergency exit on the east side. Reyes's FBI contacts, she said. Where? We don't know yet. A pause. Possibly already inside. The Meridian Club has 3 staff members on Reyes's payroll. We identified them this afternoon. 2 are being managed. The 3rd is unaccounted for. She turned that over. How many people in that room know what Reyes told the FBI? She said. Everyone who matters assumes everything, he said. In my world, you always assume everything has been heard. He looked at her then, finally, and his eyes in the dark of the car were steady and carrying the specific weight of a man who had assembled every available resource and knew it wasn't quite enough. Which means tonight, every person in that room is watching to see whether I'm still standing, whether what Reyes sold actually damaged something structural. And if they think it did, then the ones who've been waiting for a moment of weakness will find one. His jaw set. So I can't give them one. She understood completely. And Evan, she said, Marcus has 2 men on the building perimeter. The moment he's spotted, he'll wait until we're inside, she said. He won't come at you in the street. That's not how he operates. He needs an audience. He needs to feel like what he's doing is righteous. She heard the flatness in her own voice, the specific, accumulated knowledge of a woman who had lived inside someone's patterns for 2 years. He'll come in through the event. He'll find a way to be in that room. Lucien looked at her. You know him, he said. I knew who he let me see, she said, but even that version had patterns. She met Lucien's eyes. He's going to try to get me alone, away from you. He'll engineer a moment, a distraction, something that pulls you sideways. And in that window, he'll try to talk to me, convince me. He still believes he can. Can he? Lucien said. The question landed without softness, direct and exact, and she understood why he was asking it, and she did not resent it. No, she said. 1 word. Nothing underneath it that needed unpacking. Lucien looked at her for 1 more second. Then he turned back to the window. Stay within arm's reach of me, he said. All night. If something separates us, I'll find Marcus. You'll find me, he said. Quiet. Absolute. She said nothing. But something in her chest shifted and settled, the way weight redistributes when you finally stop trying to carry it alone. The Meridian Club was old money made physical, dark wood paneling and brass fittings, and the smell of decades of expensive meals, the kind of room that had witnessed significant decisions and kept every one of them. The private function room off the main corridor had been set with round tables, low lighting, a bar along the south wall, and the ambient noise of 40 people who collectively controlled more of Chicago than most of the city's elected officials. They walked in together. She felt the room register them before she'd cleared the doorway. Felt the subtle, collective attention that was not overt but was absolute. Every person in the room making a silent accounting of Lucien Moretti's posture and expression and the woman at his side. She had understood this in theory. She felt it now in her nervous system, the animal awareness of being assessed by a room full of people who were professionally skilled at assessment. She kept her chin level, kept her hand light on his arm, kept her face in the specific arrangement she'd found that read as composed without reading as performed. Marco Ferretti appeared within 30 seconds, which was either warmth or surveillance, probably both. Lucien. He kissed the European greeting, both cheeks, then turned to Sabrina. Sabrina. You look terrifying. I mean that as a compliment. I know you do, she said, and he laughed, and the laugh carried, and she felt the room relax 1/2 degree. Marco leaned close. There are 2 men at the table by the east window who arrived with Donati and have not spoken to anyone. They're watching the door. I see them, Lucien said, his voice unchanged. They're not Donati's people, Marco said. Donati told me himself he doesn't know who invited them. Then someone else did, Lucien said. Keep Donati close to you tonight, away from that table. Marco nodded once and moved off with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this for years. She and Lucien moved through the room. He spoke to people with the unhurried authority that was simply his natural state, and she stood close and let the conversations move around her and watched the room the way she'd learned to watch through a camera, not looking for what was presented, but for what was operating in the background, the peripheral geometry that held the real information. The 2 men at the east window table were watching Lucien. Not constantly, not obviously, but with the returning attention of people who had an objective. Their posture was slightly too still for civilians and slightly too casual for security. She filed it. At 8:15, she excused herself from a conversation to go to the bar for water and was aware immediately of someone moving to intercept her. Not Evan. A woman. Early 30s, dark-haired, in a dress that was exactly right for the room. She arrived at the bar 2 seconds after Sabrina and ordered wine and said, in a voice just below the ambient noise, "You need to know something." Sabrina looked at her. "My name is Carla Reyes," the woman said. "Daniel Reyes's wife." The name went through her like cold water. "You're not supposed to be here," Sabrina said quietly. "No, I came anyway." She wasn't looking at Sabrina directly. They were both facing the bar, two women having an unremarkable conversation. "My husband did something stupid and I can't undo it. But I can tell you this, the two men by the east window are FBI, and they're not here for Lucien Moretti." Sabrina kept her breathing even. "Then who?" "They're here for Evan Mercer," Carla said. "He made contact with them directly, offered them documentation of Moretti's operations, things Daniel gave him, in exchange for immunity. They accepted." She took her wine. "But the deal is contingent on Evan delivering the documentation in person tonight. Here, they're his insurance policy. If Moretti's people try to take him, the agents intervene and the deal is live." Sabrina's hands were flat on the bar. She made herself pick up her water glass. "Evan is already in the building," she said. Not a question. "He came in through the service entrance 20 minutes ago," Carla said. "He has a weapon. I don't know what kind." A pause. "I'm telling you this because my husband made a choice that put this family in danger, and this is all I can do." She moved away from the bar. "Tell Moretti, quickly." She was gone before Sabrina could respond. Sabrina stood at the bar for exactly 3 seconds. Then she moved. Lucien saw her face before she reached him and turned away from his conversation with a naturalness that was so practiced it looked effortless. She put her hand on his arm and leaned in close the way a woman leans toward the man she's with at a dinner party and said, against his ear, "Evan is inside the building. Service entrance. He has a weapon. The two men by the east window are FBI and they have a deal with him. He gives them your documentation in person tonight. If you move on him, they intervene and the deal activates." She felt him go completely still. Then, "Walk with me to the window, slowly." They walked to the window that looked out over the south courtyard, and she stood beside him looking out at the night while he processed, and she watched his reflection in the glass, the compression of his expression as he ran the calculation, the absolute steadiness of a man who could not afford to show that the ground had just shifted. "Marcus," he said quietly. He had an earpiece she hadn't noticed until now. "Service entrance. Confirm Mercer inside. He's armed. Do not approach. I need him in the open." A pause, listening. "Copy." He looked at her reflection in the glass. "You have 2 minutes before he finds a way into this room," he said. "He'll come to you first, not to me. He needs you first." "I know," she said. "If that happens," he started. "I know what to do," she said. "Sabrina, Lucien." She turned from the window and looked at him directly, and his face in the low light of the Meridian Club was more open than she had ever seen it in 2 weeks of proximity, the careful armor thin enough now that she could see the thing underneath, the man underneath, the actual human being who had raised his sister from age 3 and rebuilt a criminal empire through sheer force of controlled will, and who had, somewhere in the machinery of a revenge scheme, put a camera on a stranger's desk because he noticed she had stopped creating. "I have this," she said. "Trust me." He looked at her. "I trust you," he said, like a fact, like something that had already been true before he said it. Then the function room door opened from the service corridor, and Evan Mercer walked in, bulked. He looked smaller than she remembered. That was her first thought, and it was specific enough to surprise her. Not smaller physically, but smaller in totality. The version of him that existed in the actual world diminished somehow against the one that had been occupying space in her chest for 8 months. He was wearing a jacket that was wrong for the room, slightly underdressed, and his face had the particular quality of someone who had been running on adrenaline for too long and was now coasting on the fumes. His eyes found her in under 5 seconds. They crossed the room. Lucien did not move toward him. He He stayed where he was, present, visible, authoritative, radiating the specific calm of a man who does not need to advance because the room already belongs to him. The 40 people in it continued their conversations with varying degrees of awareness that something had changed, and the 2 FBI agents by the east window straightened fractionally but held their positions, which told Sabrina they were watching and waiting and that their deal was contingent on Evan's delivery, and Evan had not delivered yet. Evan stopped 2 feet from her. Up close, she could see the damage 8 months had done to him. Not physical, but structural. The easy confidence she remembered, the particular charm that had once convinced her she was the luckiest woman in the room, had curdled into something with edges. His jaw was tight. His eyes were moving too fast, from her to Lucien to the room and back. The surveillance of someone who knows they are outmatched and is still trying to find the angle. "Sabrina," he said. "Evan," she said, "I need to talk to you." Low and urgent, pitched for her alone. "Not here, outside, 5 minutes. I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm not asking you to—" He stopped, recalibrated. She watched him do it, watched the practiced charm reassemble itself over the desperation underneath. "I made mistakes. I know that. What I did to you. I know what I did." His voice dropped further. "But you don't understand what you've walked into here. This man—" His eyes cut to Lucien. "You don't know what he's capable of." "Tell me," she said. He blinked. He hadn't expected that. "Tell me what he's capable of," she said. "Specifically. Because you have been in my life for 2 years, Evan. I know your patterns. I know how you work. And this—" She looked at him steadily, at the man she had loved and lost and been destroyed by, from the distance of someone who had been put back together by things she hadn't expected. "This is you trying to find an angle. I'm trying to help you. You took $47,000 from me," she said. The function room was quiet enough now that people nearby could hear it, and she did not lower her voice. "You opened accounts in my name and emptied them and left me a 3-word note and moved to Florida under a fake identity with a woman you were seeing while you were with me, and then you got Isabella Moretti pregnant and left her the same way." The room had gone very still. "You don't—" He swallowed. "That's not—" "Isabella is 7 months pregnant," Sabrina said. "She's 22 years old and she's having your child, and you left her the same way you left me. Different exit, same note, same emptiness." She held his gaze with a steadiness that she recognized, from some removed part of herself, as something she had been building toward for 8 months without knowing it. "There is nothing you can say to me tonight. There is no version of this conversation where you have standing." His face changed. The charm collapsed. The practiced surface fell away, and what was underneath was rawer and uglier and more honest than anything she'd seen from him in 2 years. The actual man, frightened and cornered and furious at being cornered. And underneath the fury, the specific grief of someone who has finally understood that they have destroyed something they cannot reconstruct. "I loved you," he said. And the worst part was that she believed it was true, in whatever incomplete way he was capable of. "I know," she said. "It wasn't enough." His hand moved. She saw it before it completed. The shift of his weight, the reach toward his jacket. And 2 things happened simultaneously. Lucien moved from her left with a speed that was shocking for a man who has never hurried, and Marcus came through the function room door from the south entrance like something with purpose, and Evan's hand stopped halfway to his jacket because there were suddenly 2 men between him and Sabrina who had materialized from nothing, and the room was absolutely motionless. "Don't," Lucien said. 1 word. The temperature in it was absolute 0. Evan's hand stopped. His breathing was audible. His eyes went from Lucien to Sabrina and back, and she watched the calculation happen, watched him run the numbers and understand the room and understand that the 2 FBI agents were on their feet by the east window and had not moved to intervene, which meant Evan had not given them what he'd promised, which meant his insurance policy was conditional, which meant right now, in this room, the balance of power was singular and complete. "Evan Mercer," Lucien said, in the same quiet voice he used for everything. "You walked into my event armed, and you threatened the woman I'm going to marry." He looked at him with an expression that was not anger. Anger would have been a relief. It was something colder and more permanent. "Whatever you thought was going to happen tonight, adjust your expectations." Evan looked at Sabrina. She looked back at him, and she saw the moment he finally understood. Not the tactical situation. The deeper thing, the thing he had traveled from Florida to Chicago to disprove. The woman standing in front of him in the Meridian Club was not the woman he had left behind in a freezing apartment in March. Was not the woman who had read a 3-word note on a kitchen counter and crumpled. Was not the reduced, invisible, surviving version of herself that he had counted on persisting. She was someone else entirely. He had made her, in a way. His leaving had made her. And now she was here, inside the most dangerous room in Chicago, standing her ground with the particular ease of someone who had decided, somewhere in the last 2 weeks, that she was done being afraid of the things she couldn't control and was only going to be afraid of losing what she'd found. His face broke. Not theatrically, just broke. Something behind the eyes giving way. The architecture of the self-justification and the practiced charm and the running finally reaching its structural limit. "I have documentation," he said. His voice was ragged now. He was looking at the FBI agents, who were watching with the careful attention of men who needed to hear what came next. "I have everything. Moretti's operations, 4 months of data. I'll give it—" "The documentation you're referring to," Lucian said, "was incomplete. Whatever Reyes gave you, you should check the dates." Evan went still. "The files he sold you on November 9th, Lucian continued, were the files I wanted him to sell you. The real documentation has been with the U.S. Attorney's Office since November 6th. A pause. 3 days before Reyes made contact with you. He looked at Evan with something that was almost pity, which was more devastating than contempt. "You bought a ghost." The 2 FBI agents looked at each other. Then one of them reached for his phone. Evan's breathing had become something ragged and uncontrolled, and she watched him run the calculation and come up empty on every side. The FBI deal dead, the documentation useless, the room full of Moretti's people, and the woman he'd come to reclaim standing in front of him looking at him like he was a problem that had already been solved. "You set me up," he said. His voice cracked on it. "You set yourself up," Lucien said. "I just made sure the floor was there when you fell." Evan moved, not toward Lucien, toward Sabrina, which was the one thing she hadn't prepared the specific shape of her body for. And she had exactly 1 second of her pulse going white before Lucian's hand came across in front of her, and his body turned and Evan's forward momentum met something immovable, and Evan went sideways into a table and the room erupted. Not chaos, controlled eruption. Marcus and 2 others moving with precision. The FBI agents, decision apparently made, on their feet and pushing through. 40 dinner guests either pressing back or staying very deliberately still, depending on their experience with this category of event. She was grabbed from behind. Not Lucien, someone else, someone she didn't recognize. And her instinct was immediate and physical before her mind caught up. She drove her elbow back hard, felt contact, heard a sound, turned. It was one of Evan's people. Someone she hadn't seen come in. Younger, with the look of someone hired fast for a specific job. He recovered faster than she expected, and his hand caught her wrist and yanked, and she felt it in her shoulder. The specific pain of a joint pulled at the wrong angle, and she made a sound she would have been embarrassed by under other circumstances. Then he was gone. Marcus, from behind, with an efficiency that was almost quiet. "Miss Vale." Marcus's hand on her arm, steadying. "You all right?" Her shoulder was screaming. "Fine," she said. "Where's—" "There." Marcus turned her. Evan was on the floor. Not unconscious. Seated, breathing hard, with 2 of Lucien's men on either side and the FBI agents pushing through the crowd with credentials out and voices raised in the particular register of authority asserting itself. His jacket was open, and she could see the firearm still holstered, untouched, which meant he had never actually intended to use it or had lost the nerve at the critical moment. And both possibilities made her feel something that was not quite relief and not quite contempt, but lived in the territory between them. Lucian was standing 3 feet away from Evan, looking at him. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't disordered. His suit was barely disturbed, his expression carrying the same cold control it had carried all evening, and she found herself thinking, with the strange, detached clarity that comes in the aftermath of adrenaline, that this was who he was at the foundational level, the thing underneath all the layers of management and composure and careful architecture. Not cruel, not sadistic, just the inexorable certainty of a man who had already decided how this ended and had simply been patient enough to wait for the room to catch up. He turned and found her face, She watched him take in her shoulder, the angle she was holding her arm, the way Marcus was still steadying her. And something moved through his expression that was not composed at all. Something quick and sharp and very human that arrived and was controlled in under 2 seconds. But she saw it. She saw it clearly. She'd been trained to see the thing that happened in the unguarded half-second before the subject knew they were being watched. He crossed the room to her. "Your shoulder," he said. "It's fine." "It's not fine. Let me—" "Lucien." She held his gaze. "I'm standing. I'm here. Finish this." He looked at her for one long second. Then he turned back to where the FBI agents were pulling Evan to his feet, and his voice came out low and clear and carrying the specific authority of a man who had been building toward this moment for 4 months. "Agent Torres," he said to the agent in front, "my legal team will be at your office at 9 in the morning with the complete documentation. The U.S. attorney already has the summary. The full file will confirm everything." He looked at Evan, who was standing between the agents with his wrists being secured and an expression on his face that was, finally, something she recognized as genuine. The expression of a man who had run completely out of road. Evan looked at her. She looked back. She had imagined this moment, in the weeks and months of the survival period, had imagined what she would feel when Evan Mercer was finally, actually, tangibly cornered. She had expected satisfaction, had expected the specific, clean pleasure of justice made visible. What she felt instead was quieter than that. Not absence of feeling, something more like completion. Like a chapter ending at its proper punctuation after too long spent suspended mid-sentence. "Sabrina," Evan said. One last time. Her name in his mouth, the way it used to sound when he meant it. "Goodbye, Evan," she said. She meant it differently than the first time she'd said it, on the phone in the penthouse kitchen. That time it had been an ending she was choosing because she had to. This time it was an ending she was choosing because she was done, fully and completely. And on the other side of it was a life she was beginning to understand she actually wanted. The agents took him through the south entrance. The room let out a collective breath that had apparently been held for several minutes. Marcus appeared at her elbow with a man she recognized as the building's physician, who had apparently been on the premises, she didn't ask, and she let him assess her shoulder while the room reorganized itself around the aftermath of what it had just witnessed. She was aware of Lucien, standing 5 feet away, speaking in low, rapid sentences to Marco and 2 other men, managing the room back toward stability with the particular competence of someone who had been managing rooms in crisis for his entire adult life. She watched him work and felt, beneath the pain in her shoulder and the residue of adrenaline and the strange completion of having said goodbye to Evan Mercer in a way that finally stuck, something else entirely. Something she had been not examining for 2 weeks. Something Isabella had named in a warm kitchen over tea. Something that had been building in the space between a camera placed on a desk without explanation and a real smile that lasted 2 seconds and a man who had stayed awake on a couch all night rather than leave her alone in the dark. She looked at Lucien across the room. He looked up as if he'd felt it, and their eyes met across the wreckage of the evening. She thought, the contract ends when Evan is in federal custody. She thought, he's in federal custody. She thought, I don't want the contract to end. And then the physician said something about ligament strain, and she looked away and focused on breathing through the pain in her shoulder and told herself she would figure out what to do with what she'd just understood. The physician said ligament strain, mild, nothing torn. Sabrina sat on a chair someone had pulled from one of the function room tables, while he wrapped her shoulder with the practiced efficiency of a man who had clearly been called to situations like this before and had made his peace with that reality. The room around her was in the process of becoming itself again. Conversations resuming in lower registers, staff quietly writing the table Evan had gone into, the particular social machinery of 40 people who had witnessed something significant collectively deciding to metabolize it without making it a scene. Lucien was still working the room. She watched him from her chair, her arm in a temporary sling that the physician had produced from a bag that was suspiciously comprehensive for a dinner party. And she watched Lucien move from person to person with the unhurried authority that was simply his nature. A hand on a shoulder here, a brief exchange there, the quiet restoration of order by a man who understood that power in a room was not declared but maintained, constantly, through the accumulation of small acts of confidence. Marco appeared beside her and sat down in the adjacent chair without being invited, which was entirely consistent with everything she knew about him. "How's the shoulder?" he said. "Annoying," she said. "The other guy's nose is worse." He said it without particular relish. "Marcus?" "I noticed." Marco was quiet for a moment, which was unusual enough that she looked at him. He was watching Lucien too, with an expression that was more complex than his usual sociable surface. "You know what I've been watching him do for the last 11 years?" Marco said. "Since his father died and he took everything over and also somehow acquired a 3-year-old? He paused. "Manage. Just manage. Everything. The business, Isabella. The people in this room, every threat and every alliance and every piece of it. Never once in 11 years have I seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you when that man grabbed your arm." She didn't say anything. "I'm not telling you this to pressure you," Marco said. "I'm telling you because he won't. He'll find 17 ways to make sure the contract ends cleanly, and you can walk away with everything you're owed, and he will not say a word about what either of you actually wants." He stood up, straightened his jacket. "And that would be the stupidest thing to happen in this room tonight, which is a high bar given the evening we've had." He walked away. She sat with her wrapped shoulder and watched Lucien finish his circuit of the room, and she thought about what Marco had said, and she thought about contracts, and she thought about what it meant when the thing you had agreed to had become something else entirely in the living of it, and whether a piece of paper could contain the distance between what this was supposed to be and what it had become. They rode home in silence. Different from the silence on the way there, that one had been taut, strategic, two people holding themselves ready for what was coming. This one was emptied out, the specific quiet that settles after a long expenditure of tension, and she sat in the back of the SUV with her shoulder aching and watched the city move past the windows and felt the particular clarity of someone who has survived something and now has to decide what to do with the survival. Lucien sat beside her with his eyes forward and his hands loose on his knees, and she was aware of the inches between them as a physical thing, a quantity of space that had been measured and maintained all evening and was now, in the aftermath, carrying a different kind of weight. He spoke first. "The documentation will be formally transferred to the U.S. Attorney in the morning," he said. "Evan's arraignment will be within 48 hours. With what we've provided, there's no reasonable bail consideration. The flight risk profile alone." He paused. "He won't be out." "I know," she said. "The accounts in your name have been formally flagged as fraudulent. The bank has been notified. The process of recovery will take—" "Lucien," she said. He stopped. She turned to look at him in the dark of the car. He turned to look at her. "I know," she said. "I know all of that. I'll talk to the lawyers tomorrow." She held his gaze. "That's not what I need to talk about right now." He was quiet. "The contract ends when Evan is in federal custody," she said. "Yes," he said. "He's in federal custody." A pause. "Technically, he's in a holding facility until—" "Lucien." He stopped again. "What happens now?" she said. "To us." The word sat between them. Us. The word they had been building toward for 2 weeks and had not said directly until this moment. He looked at her for a long time. The city strobed past outside, light and dark in intervals, the Chicago night doing what it always did, indifferent to the interior weather of the people moving through it. "You can stay," he said, "as long as you need. There's no pressure to—" "That's not what I asked." His jaw tightened. She watched him reach for the composure, the managed version, the architecture that had been his primary defense against the world for 11 years. And she watched him. She could see it happening, choose not to use it. "I don't know how to do this," he said. It came out quietly. Not self-pitying, just accurate, and the accuracy of it cost him something she could see in the set of his shoulders. "The plan," he said. "The arrangement. I know how to operate inside those. I know what my role is, what the parameters are, what success looks like." He looked at her. "This—" He paused. "I don't have a map for this." "Neither do I," she said. "You're not afraid of that," he said. A statement, not a question. He was studying her face in the dark the way she studied light, practically, with care. "I'm terrified," she said. "I gave everything I had to someone who left me a 3-word note. That doesn't just—" It doesn't stop informing things. She held his gaze. But I'm more afraid of making the same mistake in the other direction, of walking away from something real because I'm too careful. She paused. You put a camera on my desk. He said nothing. You didn't have to do that, she said. It wasn't in the contract. It wasn't strategic. It was... She stopped, feeling for the right word. Human. His hands shifted on his knees, a small movement, almost imperceptible. You'd stopped, he said, creating, looking at things. He looked at the window, then back at her. It bothered me more than it should have. Why? A long pause. Because the way you looked at things before, he said, when you were shooting in the early morning, when you were just watching, there was something in it that I hadn't seen in this apartment in a long time. He met her eyes. Probably longer than I want to admit. She looked at him. The man who had rebuilt a criminal empire at 24 while raising a child, who had spent 11 years being the architecture that everything else leaned on, who had anger and loyalty and loneliness built into him at the structural level, and who had walked into a dying diner at midnight with a plan that had, somewhere in the execution, become something he hadn't planned for at all. She reached across the seat and put her hand over his. He looked down at it, then up at her. I'm not going anywhere, she said. He turned his hand over beneath hers. He held it. Not the practiced performative hold of the public appearances. The real thing, slightly uncertain, slightly careful. The hold of someone who was not accustomed to keeping things and was adjusting to the possibility. They rode the rest of the way home without talking. It was the best silence she'd experienced in 8 months. She called Daria the next morning. Daria answered on the second ring with the voice of someone who had been waiting for this call, which was either intuition or the fact that she had been texting Sabrina with increasing urgency since the photographs from the Meridian Club had appeared on 3 news sites before midnight. Tell me everything, Daria said. Sabrina told her. There was a long silence when she finished. So Evan is in federal custody, Daria said. Arraignment this afternoon. And the money. Recovery process starts this week. The lawyers think 60 to 80% is recoverable within 6 months. The rest depends on what they find in the Florida accounts. And you're still in the penthouse? Yes. Sabrina. A pause. Are you okay? She sat at the kitchen counter with her coffee, her shoulders still aching in the particular persistent way of something that was healing rather than healed. And she looked out at the November lake through 43 floors of glass, and she thought about the question. I think so, she said. Genuinely, I think so. Is it real? Daria said. Not unkindly. With the care of someone who had watched her best friend get destroyed once and needed to understand the architecture before she could stop being afraid. With him. Is it actually real? She thought about the car ride home, the held hand, the admission. I don't know how to do this. That had cost him something real to say. Yes, she said. It's the most real thing that's happened to me in a long time. Another pause. Okay, Daria said very quietly. Are you going to tell me to be careful? I think, Daria said, that you've been careful enough for several lifetimes, and I think it hasn't always served you. A beat. Be smart. That's different from careful. I know the difference, Sabrina said. Yeah, Daria said. I think you do now, but Etienne. Isabella came to the penthouse 3 days later. Sabrina had not arranged it. She arrived in the afternoon while Lucien was in a meeting, having apparently texted Marcus without going through her brother, which Sabrina was beginning to understand was Isabella's preferred operational method. She was 8 months along now, slower, and she came in and sat on the couch and accepted tea and looked around the penthouse with the particular attention of someone seeing a familiar space through new eyes. He moved things, Isabella said. Sabrina looked around. She hadn't noticed, but now that Isabella named it, the books on the coffee table, rearranged, the photography magazine that had appeared on the kitchen counter, the small succulent on the windowsill that Elena had told her, when she asked, that Lucien had specifically requested. He did, Sabrina said. He's never had plants in here, Isabella said. In 7 years of this apartment, he has never once had a plant. She sipped her tea. He also stopped eating standing up, which he's been doing since approximately forever. Marco texted me about it. Marco texts you a lot. Marco texts me everything. Isabella looked at her with the same directness she'd had in the Lincoln Park kitchen. Are you staying? Yes, Sabrina said. Something moved through Isabella's face. Not surprise. Something more like the quiet completion of a hope that had been provisional. Good, she said. Simply. Then, I need you to come to the hospital with me next week, the last scan before the due date. She set down her cup. Lucien will be there, but I need someone there who's going to worry about me specifically, not about security and logistics and everything else he manages. She met Sabrina's eyes. I need someone who's just there for me. Sabrina looked at her. Okay, she said. Isabella nodded once, with the economy of someone who does not make requests easily and does not repeat them. What are you going to name her? Sabrina asked. Isabella was quiet for a moment. She had one hand resting on her stomach in the unconscious way that had become constant, the presence of the life inside her informing every posture, every pause. Mara, she said. After my mother. A beat. She left when I was 3. I don't really remember her, but Lucien remembered her name, and I want... She stopped. You want to give your daughter something from the woman who should have stayed, Sabrina said. Isabella looked at her. Yes, she said. They sat together in the afternoon light while the lake moved outside the windows, and neither of them said anything else for a while. And it was the kind of silence that isn't absence but accumulation, the gathering of things that don't need to be spoken because they have been understood. Evan's arraignment was that same afternoon. Sabrina did not attend. She had considered it, had turned the idea over, examined it, tested the shape of what she would feel in that room. She understood that some people needed to be present at the moment of formal accounting, needed to see the system work as a way of completing something in themselves. She did not need that. She had said goodbye in the Meridian Club and meant it, and what happened now in courtrooms and holding facilities was the machinery doing its work, and it did not require her to witness it to be real. Lucien attended. He came home at 6, set his keys on the counter, and poured 2 inches of the amber whiskey he kept in the cabinet above the range, and she looked at his face and read the particular expression that was there. How did he look? She said. Lucien turned, held the glass, didn't drink from it yet. Smaller, he said. She understood. Isabella, he said. She called me after. She wanted to know if it was over. What did you tell her? That it was over. He looked at the glass. She cried. She said she'd been waiting for it to feel real, and it finally did. A pause. She asked about you. I know, Sabrina said. She came this afternoon. He looked up. She wants me at the scan next week, Sabrina said, as her person. Not yours. Hers. Something moved through his face, through the careful composure, through the managed exterior. And it was the same thing she'd seen in the car after the Meridian Club, the same thing she'd seen in his profile in the early morning dark when he thought she wasn't looking. The actual man. The one who had carried everything for everyone for 11 years. And who was, she was beginning to understand, genuinely astonished by the idea that someone might want to carry something for him. She likes you, he said. I like her, Sabrina said. He set the glass down, untouched, and came to stand at the counter across from her. I spoke to my lawyer today, he said, about the contract. She held his gaze. The terms are met, he said. Every dollar will be in your account by Friday. You have the formal release documentation, no obligations, no debt, no continuation of anything. He looked at her steadily. That was what you signed for. I'm making sure it's clean. I know, she said. I'm not... He stopped, tried again. I'm not telling you this to... Lucien. She came around the counter. She stood in front of him, close enough that she could see the particular way he was holding himself, the tension along his jaw, the effort of a man who was being more honest than he was comfortable with and doing it anyway. I know why you're telling me. You're telling me because you need me to know that nothing that happens next is an obligation, that I have every exit available and they're all clean. She looked at him. Because you don't want me here unless I'm choosing it. He was very still. Yes, he said. She put her hands flat on his chest, felt the solidity of him, the warmth, the controlled breath. I'm choosing it, she said. He put both hands over hers. He held them there. For a long moment, neither of them moved, and the penthouse was quiet around them, and the lake was dark outside, and the city hummed its constant note 43 floors below. And everything that had been constructed and performed and strategically arranged over the last 3 weeks fell entirely away, leaving only this. Two people who had found each other inside something ugly and discovered, to their own considerable surprise, that what they'd found was worth keeping. He bent his head and kissed her, not the staged photographs, not the performative lean that was calibrated for cameras and gossip sites, and the psychological dismantling of a man in Florida. This was quiet and real and slightly tentative, in the way of something happening for the first time without a script. And she kissed him back and felt it move through her like the particular quality of light through early morning glass, clear and warming and present in a way she hadn't expected to feel again. When they separated, he kept his forehead against hers. She could feel him breathing. I don't have a plan for this, he said. Low. Neither do I, she said. We'll figure it out. He lifted his head, looked at her, and the smile came, the real one, the 2-second version she'd been cataloging since the first time it appeared at the lunch on Michigan Avenue. This time it stayed longer. This time he let it. Again, winter moved through Chicago with its customary lack of mercy. The FBI case against Evan Mercer proceeded with the comprehensive documentation Lucien's team had spent 4 months assembling. The fraud, the embezzlement across 3 states, the identity theft, the accounts opened in Sabrina's name and emptied, the money moved through Isabella's life and taken. The U.S. Attorney described it, in a press statement that Sabrina read once and didn't read again, as one of the more methodically constructed personal fraud cases the office had pursued in recent years. Evan pled guilty in late January to avoid a trial. The terms of the plea included restitution, which was a word that sounded clean and wasn't, because no amount of legal restitution gives you back the 8 months you spent surviving on cheap noodles and bad diner coffee and the specific exhaustion of a woman trying to remain herself while the scaffolding of her life was removed plank by plank. What it did give her was a number, a concrete final number in an account with her name on it, her name only. No hidden additions, nothing opened without her knowledge. She checked it on a Tuesday morning in February while sitting at the kitchen counter of the penthouse, Lucien beside her drinking coffee and reading something on his phone, and she looked at the number for a long time and said nothing. He looked over. She turned the phone to show him. He looked at it, looked at her. It's not enough, he said. No, she said, but it's what there is. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he picked up his coffee and went back to what he was reading, and she put the phone down and sat with the number and what it represented. Not replacement, not repair, but acknowledgement. The formal record of damage done, which was not the same as healing but was a necessary precondition for it. She sold 2 photographs in February. She hadn't planned to. She had been shooting steadily since November. The city in winter, mostly. The specific gray and silver and dark of Chicago working through December and January, the lake in its cold states, the streets in low light. She had posted 3 images to a photography platform she'd abandoned 18 months ago without particular intention, and within 2 weeks one of them, the ghost image, her silhouette superimposed over the dark lake, the one Lucien had identified as the strongest in the first week, had been picked up by a design firm looking for prints for a corporate installation. The second was a shot she'd taken in December. Isabella in the Lincoln Park townhouse, sitting in the afternoon light by the window, one hand on her stomach and her head slightly turned, her face carrying the complex mixture of exhaustion and anticipation and contained fear that was simply the expression of a woman 8 months pregnant and facing the future without the man who'd put her there. It was one of the best photographs Sabrina had ever taken, and she had not intended to sell it, but Isabella had seen it and said without ceremony, that needs to exist in the world. And so it did. Lucien saw the bank transfer from the design firm. He said nothing. He put a single succulent on her desk. She had a desk now, in the second bedroom that had been reorganized into a workspace, and left it without explanation, which was his consistent method of acknowledging things that were important without making her feel surveilled by the acknowledgement. She photographed the succulent. She did not sell that one. But Mara Moretti arrived on a February night that was cold enough to be honest about it, in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and coffee from the machine down the hall at 3:14 in the morning. Sabrina was there. She sat in the chair by the window while the medical team worked, and Lucian stood near his sister with his hand on her shoulder in the way of someone who has been the immovable thing in a room for a very long time and knows exactly where to position himself to be most useful. Isabella was exhausted and furious and determined in the specific combination that labor apparently required, and she swore with a creativity that made one of the nurses visibly suppress a smile. And at 3:14 she made a sound that became silence, that became a different sound entirely, and the room reorganized itself around the new fact of a person in it who had not been there before. Lucian held Mara first. Sabrina watched him hold her. She had her camera. She had brought it because she had understood, arriving at the hospital, that this was the kind of moment that should be documented, and that she was the person in the room most equipped to do that. She shot Lucian holding his niece with the expression of a man encountering something that had dismantled every defense he owned. She shot Isabella in the first seconds of looking at her daughter, the absolute specific wonder of it, the way her face stripped itself of everything except that one enormous thing. She shot the room in its 3:14 in the morning configuration, the tired light, the cold window, the small human fact of a new life occupying space that hadn't held her an hour before. She lowered the camera. Lucien looked up from Mara and found her across the room, and his face in that moment, still undone, still holding the baby, the armor still entirely set aside, was the most honest she had ever seen it. She raised the camera again. She took the photograph. Spring arrived with the indifference of a city that had been doing it for centuries without anyone's assistance. The lake turned from pewter to something lighter. The streets dried. The light changed quality, warming and lengthening through the penthouse windows in the way that the photographer in her had been documenting all winter. The incremental shift from November gray through the silver dark of January to this, March morning light, at angles that made the familiar apartment look like something she was seeing for the first time. She was making coffee when Lucian came in from the early morning. He had started running in the mornings, which she'd learned in January, 4 miles along the lakefront, bodyguard 50 meters back, the one portion of his day that was apparently non-negotiable. He came in flushed with cold and carrying the particular aliveness of someone who has done something physical, and he stood at the kitchen counter and drank the coffee she handed him, and she leaned against the adjacent counter, and they looked at each other in the morning light. "Isabella called," he said. "I know. She texted me first." Mara had smiled, or produced the expression that 6-week-old babies produce that adults agree to call smiling, and Isabella had felt it necessary to notify both of them within approximately 40 seconds. "I told her I'd come Tuesday." He nodded. She watched him drink his coffee. This man who had walked into a dying diner in November and offered her revenge and a contract and turned out to be, beneath the architecture of controlled authority and criminal empire and 11 years of being everything for everyone, someone who grew plants he didn't know how to take care of and put cameras on desks and stayed awake on couches rather than leave someone alone in the dark. "What?" he said, watching him. "Nothing," she said. "I was just looking." "Documenting?" "Appreciating," she said. He held her gaze for a moment with the expression that was, after 4 months, no longer a surprise, but still did the same thing to her chest every time. The real version, unguarded, the 11 years' worth of contained loneliness becoming something else in the presence of someone who had chosen to stay when they didn't have to. He set down the coffee. He reached into the pocket of the jacket he'd worn over his running clothes, which she had initially found strange and had since learned meant he carried something he didn't want to leave in the apartment while he was gone, and set something on the counter between them. A ring. Not the diamond from the original fake engagement. She had returned that to him in December without ceremony, setting it on his desk without comment, because it was the right thing to do, and they both knew it. This was different, simpler, a thin band with a single embedded stone, chosen with the same practical precision he brought to everything and carrying, in its simplicity, the specific statement of a man who was not performing. She looked at it, looked at him. "No scheme," he said, "no strategy, no plan." His voice was even, but underneath it, Underneath the composure and the control and everything he had spent decades building, she could hear it. The specific quality of a man who is frightened and doing the thing anyway, which was the bravest version of anything she'd encountered in a long time. Just what I want. If you want it too. She picked up the ring, turned it in her fingers. She thought about the diner in November, the rain coming down in sheets, the fluorescent light flickering, a man sitting at her counter at midnight with a scar on his wrist and enough cold authority to reorganize a room. She thought about the contract she'd signed and the apartment above the laundromat she'd left behind and the camera she'd been handed without explanation and the life that had been stripped down to almost nothing and then built back up into something she hadn't anticipated wanting. She thought about Evan in a federal facility somewhere and felt the absence of feeling about it the way you feel the absence of a pain that has finally stopped, which was its own kind of clarity. She thought about Isabella and Mara in the Lincoln Park townhouse with the warm light and the smell of store-bought cookies in the oven. She thought about Marco, who texted everyone everything and was the reason this whole room was assembled. She thought about Daria, who had said, "Be smart instead of be careful," which was the most useful thing anyone had told her in years. She put the ring on. She looked at him. "Tuesday," she said. "I'm going to Isabella's Tuesday. You should come." He almost smiled. Then he did. The real one. And this time it stayed. "I'll drive," he said. She went around the counter and he put his arm around her, carefully, on account of the shoulder that was mostly healed but still talked to her in cold weather. And she leaned into him and looked out the north window at the March Lake, which was beginning to turn from its winter gray towards something warmer and less certain, and full of the particular possibility of a city deciding to begin again. She had stopped being invisible somewhere in November and hadn't noticed the exact moment. She thought maybe that was how it was supposed to happen. Not a single dramatic reversal, not one moment of reclamation, but an accumulation of small, honest things. A camera on a desk, a real smile, a man staying awake on a couch, coffee made for two in a kitchen that was learning to be shared, a three-word note that had once been an ending becoming, in retrospect, the most unlikely beginning she could have imagined. She raised his hand and looked at the scar along the inside of his left wrist that she had noticed the first night and never asked about. "Someday," she said, "tell me about this." He looked down at it, then at her. "Someday," he said. "Yes." Outside, Chicago went on being Chicago. The lake and the neon and the cold and the noise of a city that had seen everything and continued anyway. 43 floors below, the street was beginning to fill with morning, and the light was coming through the windows at the angle she'd been tracking all winter. And somewhere in the second bedroom on her desk, the camera was waiting. She would pick it up in an hour. She would go to the window and shoot the light on the water and the ghost of the city in the glass. And it would be different from November because she was different from November. And that was the thing nobody tells you about surviving something. Not that it leaves you unchanged, but that the change, if you're fortunate and stubborn and willing to let things in, can become something worth having. She stayed a little longer where she was. The morning held them both. The city moved below. And the woman who had once been invisible stood in the light and knew herself, finally and completely, seen.